Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for this video, I have my lovely girlfriend, Stacey, with me.
Hey.
And today we're going to be talking about Stephen King, but we're not going to be talking about my opinions. We're going to be talking about her opinions with Stephen King.
Oh boy. I have some hot takes.
Yeah, if you think I have unpopular opinions, oh boy. So even though she's not the biggest Stephen King fan, she has read a total of 15 Stephen King books. So we're gonna go in order of publication. So of course we're gonna start with Carrie and then work our way through his newest books. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So of course we're gonna start out with Stephen King's very first published novel, which is Carrie.
And actually this is the first one I read. It did not go well for me. I had a really hard time with the characters in this one particularly, which is weird because I'm not usually a character-driven reader, but for some reason that was like the standout complaint for me. So in this particular case, I didn't like Carrie's own body image of herself or of other females in the book. It just felt cringy to me when I read it. Like, oh, I could tell this is a male author even if I wouldn't have known based on the cover. And also I found Sue's character to be really unrealistic. To go from being a bully to just like an overnight friend just felt so weird for me. Like, I know she's not portrayed as like a typical bully in the novel, but even just someone who cares that much about peer pressure from the popular kids and what they're doing to like suddenly flip a switch and stand up to that without any particular convincing reason was just really tough for me to get on board with. So, you know, that aspect of the book didn't work for me. I also found the explanation of why and how telekinesis could be possible to be pretty dry. And I can get through some hard sci-fi. Like, it's not that type of thing always bores me, but just the way that King wrote it in this particular book didn't work very well for me. And then, of course, near the ending, I didn't really buy into the logic of when Carrie got her powers, like why it happened when it happened. I was like, no, this makes no sense. So it was definitely a bust for me.
Well, you guys know I love this book, and I could defend it, but you know we all have our different opinions, so I'm not gonna criticize you too much.
Okay. Well, I mean that's the beauty of reading, right? Everyone gets their own experience and their own opinion, and they can relate to it in their own way.
Yes. And then after that, we have Night Shift, which is his first short story collection.
And this I read because of your short story book club.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, before this, I had read 2 King books. Neither one went well, and I was like, okay, I'm done. King's just not for me. And then Jake convinced me, okay, keep trying. But Night Shift actually ended up being okay for me. It was more of a mixed bag. There were some short stories I really enjoyed, and there were others that I was like, meh. And then there were a few that were like, what is this? But overall, I had a good time with it. My favorite short story was definitely The Last Rung on the Ladder, and my least favorite was definitely Night Surf.
That's definitely the worst one.
Oh, well, good. So I don't have a hot take on this one as much.
You didn't like Children of the Corn, though.
Oh my gosh, it dragged on forever. Like, we could have just cut it after like the first few pages, and it would have been fine.
Disagree. But I'm glad you at least enjoyed it and you had a much better time with it than Carrie.
Yeah, definitely. It was interesting to explore his short stories because one of the common threads I find in my experience with King is that he tends to have like way too much setup in his books or like none at all. So it was nice to see in the short stories a bit more of a balance to that.
Makes sense.
There were still stories in there that fell under those categories, but there were a lot that didn't, which was good.
So the next book we're going to talk about is my all-time favorite Stephen King novel. 5 stars all the way. I love it so much, and that would be The Dead Zone. What did you think of The Dead Zone, sweetie?
Well, it wasn't 5 stars for me. I really enjoyed the main character in this one. I thought that the concept was really interesting, but I kind of wish King had taken the premise and the character into a different direction. It's not that I hate reading about politics, because I usually don't. It's just in this particular case, the second half of the book was really dry for me. Like, I just lost interest. I was also invested in the murder mystery part of this book, and then it just ended abruptly, and we got the answer too easily. And I was like, why couldn't that have been the main conflict of the book? I would have been much more interested in that.
That's definitely a main complaint with the book, but I think overall, just all of the components and all the directions that Stephen King went in, I enjoyed, but I completely understand why someone would want that to be more of the focus.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't a bad book. I had a good time with it. It just wasn't a new favorite for me like it is for you.
Next King book we're talking about is Cujo, and you actually got me this edition. Which
I did. I found it at my local used bookstore, and I knew, well, I was showing it to him on chat because I was like, oh, look, babe, it's like $1.99 or whatever. And he's like, oh, get it. Even if you don't end up reading it, I'll take it because I like this cover better than the edition I've got.
Yeah, I love this cover.
So now you own it.
Thank you, babe.
You're welcome. But this one, I just felt like the setup took way too long and the scope of the story was way more broad than I wanted it to be. Like, I wanted way less of what was happening to the townspeople and way more of what was happening with Cujo and the car.
That's definitely a common complaint. People don't love the first half of this book, but once it gets to the actual Cujo and, the mom and the son dealing with Cujo in the car, that's when they think it gets really good. But for me, I love all of it.
I was bored the first while. I mean, I knew going in that this was going to be more of a slow burn one because you had warned me, but it definitely was. I did like the ending though. I really appreciated the level of stakes and consequences that were in the ending of this one, unlike some other King books, which we'll get to.
The next story we'll talk about here is a novella that's in different seasons, and that would be Apt Pupil.
So this one, I was really intrigued by the setup in the beginning. I was excited at the prospect of learning more about the Holocaust, or especially from somebody, or like from a character who supposedly experienced it firsthand. But it ended up going in a very different direction than what I thought. So I was kind of bored by the direction it went in. Basically, it was promising at the start and then just kind of wasn't really my favorite.
It's one of my all-time favorite novellas.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Five stars easy.
I mean, I liked The Mist way better than that.
Okay. I mean, The Mist is great, but Apt Pupil is like top tier Stephen King novellas for me.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
What else is like near the top?
Nothing you've read.
No. Is it the other one in here that's based on Shawshank?
It's top 10, but I think Apt Pupil is underrated.
Okay.
People love Shawshank, which is fine, but I think Apt Pupil is amazing.
I guess I just wanted it to go in a different direction than what it did. He pulled a King. Like...
He is Stephen King.
I mean, he tends to do that, and it makes people annoyed, right? Like, I'm not the only one who's had that experience with a King book in general.
No.
Like, he promises you one thing in the premise, and then the direction changes, and you're like, what is this?
I mean, that was
you can either love it or hate it.
That was the same complaint you had with Dead Zone, which is fine.
Yep. Apparently, it's a common theme. So the other thing I noticed with this one, which kind of hindered my enjoyment as I kept reading, was that the way the narrative was handled shifted. So at the beginning, we kind of got a slow introduction, a little bit of information leading into things. And then towards the second half of the story, we just got like, here's something, like it just got dropped on the reader. So I didn't really like that style of writing as much as the beginning either. It wasn't just the story, it was also the writing in this one.
The next Stephen King book we're going to talk about is The Running Man. What did you think of The Running Man, babe?
Well, it was fun in the moment, but super unmemorable. Like, even when we were talking about it today, I was coming up with like my notes of what I was going to say about each of these, especially because I hadn't written Goodreads reviews during the King Readathon. I was just like, okay, rate it, move on. So I had to like talk them out with Jake a little bit ahead of time to figure out what my thoughts actually were. And I couldn't even remember how this book ended. Like, you had to tell me And I was like, I just read this like a month and a half ago. But it was fun in the moment. The pacing was good. I also enjoyed that the story in this one more relied on the main character being creative in his situation rather than just lucky. And so I appreciated all the thought that went into writing this one and enjoyed it more because of that. But it's funny, I had a way different expectation going into this book. I don't know what edition synopsis I read. It was just one of the ones on Goodreads, but I don't think it was the default one. And basically it talked about like he's going on a game show to be a contestant and he has to run. And here I am sitting here thinking, oh, like, okay, he's going on like a studio TV show and he's going to be running on a treadmill. No, this is like a manhunt type running situation. So it was like way different than what I thought based on the synopsis I read. So that was pretty funny.
You thought half this book was going to be about him on a treadmill?
I mean, he wrote Gerald's Game, and that's like half or more of the book with just a girl in one room stuck to a bed, so.
Touche.
You never know what you're getting with King. I think the other main complaint I had with this one was that I just wasn't as invested as I could have been because I didn't really understand the main character's situation in his society as well as I wanted to. Like, I think I just wanted a couple more chapters at the beginning of lead up into what his society looked like and why this was his only solution and, you know, just stuff like that.
You wanted the world building a little more fleshed out?
Yeah, I did. I would have probably been more invested in his situation and story if I had gotten a better sense of where he was at.
And we also have Skeleton Crew, which is actually Stephen King's second short story collection, and you also joined us for the Stephen King Short Story Book Club.
Yes, but I didn't follow the schedule because I'm a rebel.
Yeah, I think to quote you, you said, fuck the schedule?
Maybe. So this collection was good. It had some good moments, but it wasn't as good for me as Night Shift. I found a lot more stories in here that I sort of felt meh about. Like, there weren't that many that were as memorable, but there were a few gems for sure. So my favorite in the collection, if anyone was curious, was definitely The Jaunt. And my least favorite was Beach World with all its like magical realism. Like, no.
I loved Beach World.
It makes no sense.
It doesn't have to make sense.
Listen, it wasn't fun for me. It didn't make sense. Also, the poems weren't my favorite either. But does anyone like the poems? Like, dude.
No one likes your poems, Stephen King.
Oh, no. I'm sure someone does. But I have yet to meet them.
Yeah. Oh boy. We've got Misery, which is my second favorite King book of all time. How did you feel about Misery, sweetie?
Well, it was my second least favorite King book of all time. Okay, it was better for me than Carrie. I really liked the characters in this one. I thought it was more realistic. You know, the world building was better. But I was not at all invested in the book within the book. And I read this back when I was just starting to get back into reading, kind of. Like, I think maybe a year after I started reading seriously again. And I hadn't, at that point, developed a patience and a tolerance for slow pacing the way I have now with fantasy. So to me, this was like, oh, can something happen already? Like, I'm so bored.
Oh, man.
I know. It's more about the psychological horror, but it just didn't hit for me the way it does for other people. I think, in this case, I'd probably like the adaptation a whole lot better.
You haven't seen the movie?
No.
Well, we need to watch the movie.
Yeah, Kathy Bates is Annie, right?
Yeah.
So that'll be good. I'll have to watch the movie at some point with you.
With your criticisms, I understand, like, the book within a book, like, not liking that aspect, but...
Yeah, I think basically just because it jumped around. Like, it was just this random character that you hadn't met, and you see her doing random things, but it didn't feel like a cohesive story within the book. Like, there was nothing to really gravitate, or there was nothing to really grab my interest if I didn't care about the character. Like, I needed something to happen. At least if something wasn't happening in the real story, something could have happened in the book story, like the book within the book story.
I just completely disagree that you thought this was boring. I thought this was gripping the whole way through. I thought it was very creepy. I don't really get scared during books, but this is probably the scariest book I've ever read.
All right.
Just putting yourself in Paul Sheldon's situation and just trying to like wrap your head around what that would be like, I thought was pretty terrifying and pretty gripping.
All right, I guess I just didn't get that invested. So maybe it's a me problem.
It's definitely a you problem.
Okay. Well, you know what? I'm not the only one who doesn't like Misery, so.
One of the few.
My sister didn't like it that much either.
Damn it, Lisa. So Stacey also read another novella that was in 4 Past Midnight, which is not really one of my favorite novella collections. And the one that she did read was The Sundog, which also not really one of my favorite novellas.
Not one of my favorites either.
We agree.
Yeah. So first of all, before we get into it, public service announcement, this definitely spoils Cujo. It casually mentions the entire ending, how that turns out. I think it spoils a death in Cujo even. Mm-hmm. It spoils it. So if you have a desire to read Cujo, definitely make sure you read it before you read this.
Yes.
Not after.
You're trying to trick people, babe?
No.
So what did you think of Sundog, babe?
Well, I think King did one of his classic things where he gives you a premise and then you are looking forward to that and then he takes it and changes direction with the story and you're like, but this isn't what I wanted. So I'm sure some people enjoyed it, but it didn't really work for me. Basically, the premise of Sundog, if you didn't know, was that a boy gets a camera for his birthday and as he's taking pictures, this vicious dog is in the background of the pictures and keeps getting like closer and closer in the picture. So I thought it was going to be more about like his terror and like his experience and him trying to figure out what was happening as a kid, like what's going on. But really it ends up switching directions into someone else trying to sell the camera to very eccentric and paranormal collectors. And it was more about them. And I was just like, meh, that's not really what I wanted.
I agree. And again, it's another instance where Stephen King is usually good at pacing novellas and writing them like at a proper length. But this one was just way too long. I think the audio you listened to was like 6 hours.
Yeah, you know what is funny? I didn't really find that this one was overly long compared to some of his other books, but it's funny you did.
Well, I mean, it's overly long for a novella.
I guess. I mean, some of his other novellas were like 5-6 hour audiobooks too. Like The Mist or At People. Like, they're all longer.
But those were good. Whatever.
I'm just teasing. I'm just teasing.
And the next book we have to talk about is Gerald's Game. What did you think of Gerald's Game?
So I had a really good time with this one until the last 20%.
Oh dear.
So I really enjoyed Jesse's story. I was surprisingly intrigued by the contained setting. I thought maybe I would get bored because there can't, like, how much can really happen in a contained setting, right? But it does have like a past timeline as well, which helped break it up and make it more interesting. So I found her...
Son of a bitch.
Once we got to the last 20% of this one, however, it was like after the main climax of the story had already happened, and it was just like so drawn out, and I was like, come on. Like this entire last 20%, like 100 pages or so, could have just been summarized in an epilogue that was like a news article that told us what happened, and it would have been so much happier.
I understand where you're coming from, and that's definitely a valid criticism, but I think overall it still works for me.
Yeah. The first chunk worked for me, and then the last 20% not so much. It made me lower my rating for sure.
You just wanted like a couple page epilogue.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah. We could have cut out 100 pages and had the same information.
And now we're getting to Stacey's favorite Stephen King book, which is the only Stephen King book out of all of the 15 we're going to talk about today that she gave 5 stars. Can you guess which one it is?
Finally, a good King book, guys.
Oh. They're... whatever.
I'm teasing.
The book we're talking about, of course, is Dolores Claiborne.
So I really loved the main character in this one, of course. Her dialogue and her voice were really funny, which I wasn't expecting going in. But I enjoyed that just as much as I enjoyed the actual premise of the story playing out. I loved all of her little stories within the story of her experiences. It was really interesting to read. I loved also that she was very reactive and expressive, and she had feelings about everything she was going through. It was great.
You love reactive characters.
I do. It makes me connect to what they're going through a little bit more. I think maybe just because I'm an empathetic person, like to hear a character talk about what's happening for them makes me get drawn in more.
And she definitely doesn't leave anything inside. She spouts it out to the world.
It's glorious. It's very entertaining.
Yes.
So if you're a fan of like fried green tomatoes, I would definitely recommend this one. It gave me those vibes for sure.
I've never seen that movie.
Well, maybe we have to watch it. It's also got Kathy Bates.
We're gonna have a Kathy Bates marathon.
We might.
Sounds good. So Kathy Bates marathon. We're gonna watch Misery, Fried Green Tomatoes, and then also she plays Dolores Claiborne.
Perfect.
Next book we have here is The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. Very short book. What did you think of it?
Surprisingly, I actually felt basically the same way that you did.
We agree on a Stephen King book.
We did. Like, not even just in the basic rating, but in our thoughts on the book, too. So basically, I think we both had a really good time with the main character and her reactions to things in her situation. But we were kind of meh on all the baseball stuff. It just kind of brought the story down a little bit for us.
Yeah, Stephen King is a huge baseball fan, and it makes sense for him to include that in his stories, but whenever it gets to like the baseball stuff, I kind of just tone it out.
Yeah. I was kind of forced into watching and playing baseball as a kid because it's my mom's favorite sport. And so now I'm like, oh, baseball? Like, no. It's not my thing.
You're into hockey and I'm into football.
Hey, I've been watching football.
You have been watching football since you've gotten here.
I was here for American Thanksgiving and I watched all 3 games in their entirety.
They were good games too.
Yeah, they were.
But no baseball for us.
Yeah, no thanks.
Anything else about the book?
No.
That's it?
That's it.
Are you sure?
I'm sure.
Okay.
If you want to know more, go watch Jake's review.
Yeah. And we have 3 more to talk about, and one of them is Joyland. Another short one. What did you think of Joyland, sweetie?
I actually really enjoyed it. It wasn't an all-time favorite, but I had a good time with it. I thought my main complaint with it was that some of the pacing in the middle was off, but I really enjoyed the main character. I really enjoyed the amusement park setting, and I liked all the tension in the story that was introduced based on the fortune teller saying like, oh, this is gonna happen, and then you're just like waiting for it, and you're like, oh, but how does this make sense, or how does it connect? And there's also a bit of a murder mystery going on. So I found all of that interesting and kept my attention well, along with main character's voice and narration of his experiences.
Another King book we'll talk about here is Mr. Mercedes, which is the first book in the Bill Hodges trilogy. And this is more of like a thriller detective book. So what did you think of it, Stacey?
Well, oh boy. No, it wasn't that bad. I did have a good time with the mystery elements, and some of the story was really enjoyable for me. But I did have some major grievances. And the first one, of course, is the pacing, because, you know, it's King and he likes to ramble. But I think the biggest, most egregious thing for me was right in the middle of the climax of the story. The most exciting part. We're like finding out what's going on, and it's like, what's happening? And then all of a sudden he cuts away to a side character's backstory. And you're just like, why? I don't care. I want to know what's happening. It was very frustrating.
I can tell.
Yeah, it wasn't great.
But it's funny you say like it's like not paced well, but in reality, this is one of his more faster paced books.
Yeah, I think I've read the ones that are better paced, and I already have complaints with the pacing, so that makes me very concerned about my future of King reading.
I don't think you'll have a great time reading his tomes.
Yeah, I don't.
So like The Stand, It, Under the Dome, you probably should stray away from those.
Okay.
And we have one last book to talk about, and this is actually one that you enjoyed.
I did, yes.
And we'll talk about it later.
No, we'll talk about it now. Ha ha ha. So this one, as Jake said, I had a really good time with. I really enjoyed the main character's ability and how everyone around him reacted to and exploited at times that ability. I just mainly wish that the pacing was a little tighter and that we got to see a whole lot more of the villain, because it was just like snippets here and there, and I'm like, come on, I want to know more.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And there is one aspect at the end that kind of just feels like thrown in there just for like shock value that we both didn't really love.
Yeah. But overall, had a great time.
Yeah, you give it 4 stars, right?
4.25 stars.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is 15 King books. You want to try to hold them up, babe?
Sure.
Kind of in reverse order here.
That's okay. You made a stack.
So overall, how would you describe your Stephen King experience, sweetie?
Well, I think he has intriguing premises, but I don't always love the direction he takes them in. Sometimes I feel like you're not getting what was promised and it ends up being disappointing. And then other times you're not getting what was promised and it's great. And you just don't know what it's going to be. So I find that a little bit tricky. I obviously wish that he had tighter, faster pacing, or that some of the like side character stuff or like explanation of the setup and all that was a little shorter. It's weird. Sometimes with his books, I find he has like no setup and you're just thrown in, and I wish there was more. And then other times I'm like, this setup takes half the book. Can we just like get there already? So it's very different for me, like setup wise. I just feel like it's never the happy medium unless I'm in a short story, and then I might get lucky.
Mm-hmm.
So I also find that I tend to enjoy his newer books, which is a hot take. A lot of people like his older stuff.
Yeah, people love their classic King, but you tend to you've liked 4 of his newer books. So
yeah, so maybe I should read more of the newer ones, except Fairy Tale, because you don't think I'm gonna like that one.
Don't read that book.
Oh, okay.
And some of his older ones, they're like just classic. Like
Carrie,
Misery, Cujo. You liked The Dead Zone, but you didn't love it. Apt Pupil from different seasons, like just classic Stephen King books. You're just kind of like meh,
or ugh,
or
not even just meh. Sometimes like ugh, no.
Oh man.
Yeah. So apparently the takeaway is that I should read more modern King.
Okay, we can handle that.
Well, that's good. I also tend to find that I really like the way he writes some of his characters, the ones that are very reactive and expressive, and you're really getting a sense of how they feel and what they're going through is interesting and enjoyable.
So a clear example is Dolores Claiborne.
Yes.
You wished all of his characters were like that.
Yeah, basically. I feel like I would feel the stakes of the story a lot more, especially in his horror books, if all of them were like feeling terrified and just, running through their mind about like, oh, this could happen or that could happen, or like, oh, this is terrifying me extra because of this thing I had in my past, or, all those things make it more compelling and interesting for me. So I wish that he would write more of those characters.
Okay.
It's funny because I'm not even a character-driven reader, but that tends to be something I pick out and really enjoy in his books when I do enjoy them.
Yeah, he's definitely not a plot-driven reader.
Writer. I can tell.
Okay, so that about wraps up this video. What did you guys think of Stacey's opinions on the books that she's read? Did you agree with her? Do you disagree with her? Do you like any of the books that she's read? Do you dislike them? And just leave all those awesome comments down in the comments below.
And most importantly, based on my experiences with King and what I had to say, what other King books or non-King books do you think I'll really love?
That also.
Yeah.
And thank you guys so much for watching. Go subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Go check out the Book Astronomer Discord. You can check out my Patreon page if you want to support me there. I also have my Amazon wishlist if anyone would like to buy me a book. Thank you guys so much for watching and have a fantastic day.
See ya.